How do you like the new tech station back there? What do you think? We certainly want to thank everyone, Dan and Gordon and Gail and everyone that's been, Ken and everyone that's been involved with that tech station as we go through this transition. I think ultimately it's going to help us to make our worship here better. I think it will enable us to have a better presence online and just to be more professional with it. And it's just a thing that needs to be done. And I appreciate all of the efforts that you guys have put forth and all those that will continue to. And that brings up another point, and that is if you feel the need, or you feel God calling you into some type of a service ministry here, whether it's working on the tech station or whatever, it's time to get involved. That's one of the things that God calls us to do, is to be involved in our church. It's not just praying, it's serving each other. Are we serving each other? And I'm going to leave that conversation simply between you and God. It's not up to me. Okay? Let me share with you something from Sarah Young this morning. And it's for March 6th. And she writes, "Continue on this path with me, enjoying my presence even in adversity. I am always before you, as well as alongside of you. See me beckoning to you. Come, follow me. The one who goes ahead of you, opening the way up, is the same one who stays close and never lets go of your hand." The one who goes ahead of you, opening up the way, is the same one who stays close and never lets go of your hand. Do you sense that? I am not subject to the limitations of time or space. I am everywhere at every time, ceaselessly working on your behalf. That is why your best efforts are trusting me and living close to me. Oh my goodness, if I could simply apply it to my life. That is why your best efforts are trusting me and living close to me. Isn't that the mission of our Christian walk? To simply continue to grow in our trust and faith of who God is and the way that He interacts in our life. Now let me ask you a question. How many people, or how many of you like to be first? How many of you like to be first? No one? You're the biggest bunch of liars, except Larry. He's honest. What? How many of you like to be first? I think it's part of human nature, isn't it? You know, football teams, they go out and they practice. Yes, I like that guy. You know, they go out and they practice and they spend weekends and, you know, nighttime, and they go to the gym and work out, and they do all of these things so that, you know, they can be champions. They can be first. They can be first in their division. They can make their, you know, for school pride. They can excel. They can do good things. They can be number one. Sometimes you see the same types of things with music majors. I was a musician most of my life, and I remember at University of Maryland, I would go in and watch some of the music majors practicing. And it was phenomenal. They would always be there, practicing hour after hour, weekends and nights, in order to excel with the talents that God had given to them. Yeah. Sometimes theologians, philosophers, doctors, people have this natural drive, I think, that want to be the best that we can be. Again, we are learning here in this series to be a lot like Jesus. I don't think we'll ever master this side of heaven, but we're being trained to become more and more like who He is. What does that mean? It means I'm being trained to love my enemies. It means I'm being trained to not be angry with the person that just stole something from me. but instead to look at that person and say, I'm going to assume that they needed that. What else can I do to provide for your needs in the name of Christ? It's not easy. We're being trained to not bury a relationship with somebody like we talked about last week. We're being trained to not commit this thing called heart murder that we talked about 2 weeks ago. We're being trained not to let our ambitions overrun this hard attitude that Jesus wants us to kind of grab a hold of and to become part of us. So let me kind of set the scene for you a little bit. Jesus is on his way to Capernaum. In this particular scripture that we're going to look at today, he's in a house. This is the north shore of Capernaum. Kind of gives you an idea of the setting of where they were. If you go to the next one, this is the typical structure of what a house looked like that a family would live in the city of Capernaum. You can see at the bottom here, you've got a small little courtyard with the chickens running around and, a goat, and, they would have some storage. And right down here was their kitchen. And then you could climb up this little ladder, and up top was the place that they would basically sleep. That was a house. And you would have a bunch of people living in there. I'll go to the next one. I think this is one that they excavated. And again, the structure is pretty much the same. Sometimes they would actually stack the houses on top of each other. And you would have multiple families living in there and sharing the same courtyard area in the bottom. But it gives you an idea of the setting that Jesus is in now with the disciples, and he's going to talk to them. They're in a very small, very confined, very isolated type of a place. Now, as they're walking to Capernaum, you got to kind of picture this in your mind. Jesus is either right behind the group of disciples, or maybe he's in front and they're following him. But he hears them talking. He hears them discussing something. And in some aspects, it gets a little bit heated. And Jesus is going to ask them, what are you guys talking about? What are you guys going over back there? What are you discussing on the way here? I sense in this story that I'm going to read to you a little bit of frustration in Jesus' tone of voice, his attitude. Why? Probably because at this point in his ministry, he knew his time was getting short. And he needed these guys to understand. He needed them to get it. He needed them to say, you know what? You've been following me and watching me, and I've been showing you the way. And right now, you need to really comprehend what I'm trying to get you to do, where I'm trying to get you to go, who I'm trying to get you to become. And Jesus asked them, what were you talking about? And they stayed on there silent. You ever do that as a kid? Mom and dad, they know you're screwing up. And they ask you, what are you doing out here, Johnny? Nothing. Nothing. Huh? You guys never, Kagan, you never do that, right? That kid's got more energy than I'll ever have. Yeah. All right. They left that place and passed through Galilee. Jesus did not want anyone to know where they were. Keep that in mind. Jesus did not want anyone to know where they were because he was teaching his disciples. He said to them, the Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men. They will kill him, and after 3 days he will rise. But they did not understand what he meant and were afraid to ask him. There's a problem immediately. These guys were living with Jesus. They were following him. They had given up a tremendous amount of their own life in order to follow him and to want to become disciples. And yet they were afraid to ask him about it. Why? They came to Capernaum. And when he was in the house, he asked them, what were you arguing about on the road? But they kept quiet because on the way, they had argued about who was the greatest. Sitting down, Jesus called the 12 and said, anyone who wants to be first must be the very last and the servant of all. Then he took a child, whom he placed among them, and taking the child in his arms, he said to them, whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me doesn't welcome me, but welcomes the one who sent me. This teaching will turn your life upside down. This teaching that Jesus is giving the disciples right there and giving us this morning, especially if you're a young adult, like these 6th graders here, will turn your life upside down. It will change the priorities of everything that you're doing. For a husband and wife. What Jesus is teaching will turn your marriage upside down. As a businessman, it will turn your life, your business life, your business world upside down. As a member of a church, as a member of the council, as a member of some team, it will turn your life upside down. I want you to understand something. If you don't hear anything else I say today, understand that this scripture is Jesus' signature teaching. This is the big one. This is the main deal. This is the one I really want those guys, those disciples, to get and to understand. And he says to them, he says, what are you arguing about? Now don't get me wrong. Wanting to be great is not necessarily a bad thing, is it? Wanting to excel in what you're talented in and what you're good at, and wanting to be good in maybe in sports or your studies or all these, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It certainly is part of human nature. The context here is that these disciples knew that the long-awaited Messiah was Jesus. They believed that. That's one of the reasons they were following him. They were hanging out with this guy. These 12 disciples were part of the group. They were part of the clan. This was heavy stuff for them. They had given up a tremendous amount in order to be there with Jesus, to be known as a disciple. They had given up a tremendous amount emotionally and spiritually in order to follow him. And yet they still don't quite get it. And he comes out with these scriptures, these stories, these unbelievable teachings that just take their world and just turn it completely upside down. Jesus really is asking them, you know, as they're walking down the road, what are you talking about? What really this scripture story is saying is, are you envisioning yourself as the starting quarterback? Or do you envision yourself as a second string place kicker? Where do you see yourself? Jesus is getting ready to set up his empire. Jesus is, the Messiah is here, and the kingdom of God is going to come, and I want my position in there. Where am I going to fit into this whole thing? Isn't that kind of normal? Isn't that kind of, human nature to wonder where I'm going to fit in the midst of all of this? Especially when you've invested so much. I've spent all this money going to college, and I've studied, and I've given up, a lot of my life in order to graduate. And it's normal to know, to think, to wonder, where in the heck am I going to end up? Now, I got to share with you a couple things. Before this signature teaching, there's two things that happened in the lives of the disciples with Jesus that really dramatically changed the whole thing. The first one is Jesus had given the disciples this power and strength and says, I want you to go out and tell other people about me. And he says, I give you power to heal. I give you power to cast out demons and all of these things. And it's like, I'm the main man, And they go out and they're telling people about Jesus, and they're healing people that are sick. And, they're casting out demons, and they're like, yes, yes. It's kind of like that first little kid picture. Got it, me and Jesus, man, we're a team. And then all of a sudden, what happens? some dude comes along with his son, and his son is demon-possessed, and they try and it just ain't working. That's embarrassing. That took their pride and just sliced it in half. And Jesus comes along and says, well, this kind can only be removed by prayer. Watch this. And he takes care of it. Now these guys were constantly being challenged with their own pride and their attitude. And Jesus is teaching them that, the first will be last, the last will be first. And he takes their pride that day and he just slices it out. Another thing that took place before this signature teaching of Jesus, not just the demonic child, but also Jesus, he does something very, very unique. He goes to the group of disciples, the 12, and he picks out 3 of them. And he says to the front row, he says, let's see, Grace and Olivia and what's your name again? Oh yeah, Olivia. You 3 come with me. The rest of you stay there. How do you think that made them feel? I mean, what is Jesus doing here? He takes these 3 and they're like, oh, we're something special, we get to go with Jesus. We're something really cool. The rest of you suckers, losers, you guys get to stay there. We're probably going to get our big crowns right now, or find our place in the kingdom. He's messing with their attitudes. And Jesus takes them up to the top of this mountain, and he's transfigured. They see him in his glorious body and all this. And then, oh, by the way, on the way down, what does he do? Don't tell anybody. Yeah, don't tell anybody. You can't tell them what took place up here. Really? We're selected out of the group to do something really special because we are special, and now we can't tell anybody about it? What do you think the ones that were still down there felt like? Oh, we're part of the 12, but we don't get to go up there? You see, in all of these aspects, Jesus is having them challenge themselves with their attitude of heart about their position. Really what he's doing is he's teaching them about their own attitude of pride. He's challenging them to their core beliefs, to their core of what they're all about. To be the first, you have to be the last. To be the first, you have to be the last. To be great, you really got to be insignificant. To be admired, you have to be the most humble. It was totally against the grain of the culture. It was totally against human nature. How do you address people in your life? How do you address people that maybe you view them as, not quite as good? Do you ever do that? Do we look at people like the disciples were looking at themselves sometimes? And really the question is whether or not we are following this signature teaching of Jesus. Am I the humble one? Am I the one that lifts others up, who's more concerned about their well-being and not my own? Am I the one that uplifts them? What do you do with people, though, that we encounter on a daily basis? What about the person that's just plain boring? How do you handle that? How do you handle the person that just rambles on and on and on? You see, Jesus is causing them to look at this aspect of pride in their own heart. And he says, nobody has more to be proud of than I do. He says, yet I came here to serve and to serve you. He says, you want to be great? then you got to be the last. You need to get over yourself. He says, look at me. He says, nobody is going to get it until you start learning these concepts, is what he's teaching. Pride says I'm self-sufficient. Pride says I'm something special. Pride says that it's all about me. Pride says that I deserve to be served. After all, look at all my accomplishments. Jesus said, you need to take your accomplishments and put them aside for the well-being and the welfare of another person. Can you separate yourself far enough to be able to serve the way that I'm serving? Why do you think Jesus then chose a child? He took a little child whom he placed among them, taking the child in his arms, and he said to them, whoever welcomes one of these little children in my name welcomes me. And whoever welcomes me does not welcome me, but the one who sent me. Why do you think Jesus takes a little child and uses that example for them? Why? Because a little child can't bring themselves up. A little child can't make themselves something special at that point in their life. In the culture back then, that little child had no status whatsoever. They were loved by mom and dad, I'm sure, but as far as in the system, in the culture, they were nothing. They had no rights. They had nothing. And Jesus is saying, when you welcome somebody like that into your life, into your heart, he said, what you're doing is you're welcoming me. And when you welcome me, you welcome the Father. It really is an example of God welcoming us into his family. He said it's when you put other people first. It's when you can let go of yourself enough to put someone else ahead of you. And isn't that what this is all about here? We talk about the first must be last and the last being first. Think about it. God comes in human form in order to be decimated. Wow. For you, isn't it? And for those that you and I, in our heart of hearts, consider to be the least. Now let's be real. We don't always value people the way we should. This is part of what Jesus is teaching. He said, my heart does value people. My heart sees every person as a dearly loved child of God, regardless of how far they have fallen. Does your heart see them too? He said, that's why I came. As you come forward for communion today, I want to ask you again to go back, sit down, and talk with God about our own attitude of heart, about where we see ourselves in the overall picture. Are we like the disciples walking down that road toward Capernaum? And are we saying to ourselves, I'm going to be something great in God's kingdom? Because you know what he's saying back to you? He's saying, if you want to be great, then you will be the least. So what did he tell you? How's your heart? I know he told me I have a long way to go. But I think the key thing is that we're willing to go to Jerusalem. You see, the disciples didn't have it all together. Most of the time they missed it. It wasn't until after Jesus ascended into heaven and they actually took off on their ministries that they started to understand many of the concepts and the things that he taught them. Especially this thing about humility, this thing about being the last. And by being the last, you become the first. You know, you grow up in the world and the culture, and you're taught things from infancy. It's difficult to change those things all of a sudden. Think about the person in your life right now that you have the most distaste for. Can you serve that person in love? How do we grow? Again, I've used these images up here. We grow spiritually by joining together in community, church. We grow by spending time with God, quietly, intimately, just he and I, just him and you. And we join with small groups of people to talk about life issues, to talk about his word. And again, I encourage you, if you want to become part of a small group, a group that continues on this journey to a little bit deeper level, by being in a small group, which is basically what the disciples were, is a small group with Jesus as their leader. If you want to, if you're ready for that, I would encourage you to put down on the attendance sheets, yes, I'm going to be part of the group. It's one of the ways that we grow. One of the ways that we change. Jesus is always asking that question, are you willing to change? Or are you going to argue about who's going to be the greatest in the kingdom? All the way to Capernaum. In many respects, he's asking, go back to that person that you had the most distaste for and ask yourself, are my thoughts beneficial and uplifting and healthy for this individual, or are they decimation? Always asking us to look inside. Father, I pray that as we continue down this journey to become like your Son Jesus, I pray that you would continue to challenge us to our depths. How else will we change? How else will we become who you want us to be unless we are willing to take a look inside and willing to open ourselves up to whatever it is you're creating, regardless of whether we like it or agree with it. Help us, Lord, to become all that you've created us to be. And it is in the precious name of Jesus that we pray. Amen.